I think that this topic fits in nicely with the previous talk about differentiated instruction, because both things go hand in hand. So, okay, let's see, let's start. So I'm sure that you are all familiar with this situation, right? A group of students are listening to the teacher, she's explaining the lesson, and then the teacher starts thinking, okay, I'm teaching this lesson, but are my students learning? And I think this is a big question for us. Is our teaching leading to learning? And we obviously have a tool to help us answer this question. And that tool is assessment. Now, there are two ways in which we can assess. That is, every time we assess our students, we either assess in a formative or in a summative way. So, assessment of learning is summative in nature because it usually happens at the end of a period of teaching. For example, at the end of a unit, a term, a year, a unit of work, with an eye towards determining who has mastered the content and who hasn't. Now, assessment for learning or formative assessment is different. It is formative because the purpose is not to determine who succeeded and who did not, but to provide guidance to the student through specific formative feedback. Assessment for learning emphasizes learning rather than grading. Students don't receive a grade, they receive feedback that helps them to improve. Therefore, what makes an assessment formative, it's not a name, it's not a question of labels. It is what the teacher does with the information the assessment generates. When you use formative assessment, you identify the present status of a student in terms of the learning standard, you diagnose what to do to assist them, you provide feedback, you allow the students to make changes, and then we can celebrate success. Now, a key resource created by the Assessment for Learning Reform Group is the 10 principles of assessment for learning. Assessment for learning or formative assessment should, first of all, be part of our planning. Our planning should provide opportunities for teachers and learners to obtain and use information in order to help progress towards the learning goals. And it also has to be flexible to respond to initial and emerging ideas and skills. It should focus on, I'm sorry, I think here, I thought so. There was a jump, a glitch in my presentation, I'm sorry. A focus, we should focus on how students learn. That is, the process of learning has to be in the minds of both the teacher and the learner when the assessment is planned and when the evidence is interpreted. Learners should be aware of the how of their learning as they are of the what they are learning. It should be central to classroom practice. It should be a central feature of our practice. That is, much of what we do with learners do in the classroom can be described as assessment. That is, tasks, questions prompt learners to demonstrate their learning and their understanding and their skills. It should also be seen as a key professional skill. I've noticed, not only because of my own training as a teacher many years ago, when the dinosaurs were roaming the land, but also over the years as a teacher trainer, I've noticed that assessment is not given the prominent place it should have in the contents of programs of study. Maybe that is changing in the last few years, but it hasn't been so for a long time. So much of many of the programs that we see, the programs of study, do not include training on assessment, and it is a key professional skill, in my view. Also, it should be viewed as sensitive and constructive. That is, we as teachers should be aware of the impact the comments that we make, the grading, the marks have on the students' confidence, and our feedback should be as constructive as possible. Also, we should never underestimate the importance of student motivation. Assessment that encourages learning fosters motivation by emphasizing progress and achievement rather than failure. Also, it should promote understanding of goals and criteria. That is, for effective learning to take place, learners need to understand what it is that they are trying to achieve. And of course, they need to want to achieve it. So communicating assessment criteria involves discussing these criteria with the students using student-friendly language, and also providing examples of how these criteria can be met in practice. Also, we need to ensure that our students receive constructive guidance on how to improve their learning. And this is very important in my personal view. We should aim at formative assessment or assessment for learning, helping develop the learner's self-capacity for self-assessment. We should pinpoint their strengths and advise them how to develop these strengths. We should be clear and constructive about weaknesses, how they might be addressed. We should provide also opportunities for them to improve upon their work. And this, I think, is contributes to developing the learner's ability to assess their own work, which is not just an academic skill. I think it's a skill for life. And finally, that is, formative assessment should recognize the full range of educational achievement. That is, we should equip learners with the desire and the capacity to take charge of their learning through developing these skills of self-assessment. Now, let's see how self-assessment fits into the classroom. Why do we think it's so important and useful? It focuses on both learners and students, and it focuses on all of us, teachers and students, understanding three key things. Where the learner is going, that is, sharing the aims of a lesson and the success criteria helps the learner see what they are aiming for and what they need to do in order to achieve those aims. Also, where the learner is now, that is, techniques, for example, effective questioning, will help us gauge what individual students and groups have learned during a lesson, generating evidence of learning that both them and us can use in order to improve our teaching and their learning. And finally, the third aspect we need to focus on, or we need to understand, is how can the learner get there? That is, we should use the evidence of learning in order to inform the choices about what they will do next in the class, what we can do with individual students, with groups of students, and also learners can use this evidence to make decisions about their own learning. So, when integrating assessment for learning in our classroom practice, it's advisable to take one area at a time and allow for its development rather than rush into a succession of rapid changes. It's the same that I mentioned in the comments, in the chat, in the previous talk, baby steps. Also, do not underestimate the time and the effort and the planning required to effect real improvements. Engaging with the strategies we are going to have a look at a superficial level is not enough. Yes, it takes time to understand the rationale underpinning each element and also to make sense of it in our classroom context. Now, let's have a look at the main elements, the main components of assessment for learning. The main components are learning intentions, that is, the steps or the key ingredients that are pertinent to the new learning. And we can negotiate this with the students before the learning begins. And it is only these items that the students are going to be measured against. Also, we have the success criteria. Success criteria are also the parameters against which students will realize if they have achieved the learning intentions, that is, the objectives. Formative feedback that provides, as I have said, students with useful information, and you, of course, with useful information about the learning experience and also information about what to change if necessary. And feedback, in order to be formative, should be based on the agreed success criteria. And also peer and self-assessment. That is, peer and self-assessment that considers not only what pupils have learned, but also how they learn best. I'm going to touch in this session briefly upon these items because, of course, this is there's a lot here to talk about, but at least in this session, I will be able to give you a bird's eye view of all these elements. So let's have a look at the first couple of elements, learning intentions and success criteria. Now, we are all familiar with using learning intentions, although we can use different names for them. Learning intentions, objectives, goals, aims. That is, the description of what you want the students to know, to understand, or to be able to do by the end of the lesson. Yes, they spell out what the pupils will learn and why. And the success criteria show the students how to recognize success. It will let them know if they have achieved the learning intentions. And of course, they are based on the learning intentions. Now, why are they important? Again, this is something that I have noticed over the years, and also as a writer of teachers' books. Despite building learning intentions into our planning, and we have also the learning intentions and the success criteria in the course books that we have, that we use, or in most course books that we use, we rarely share them with the students. But at the same time, we want the students to be self-motivated and have a sense of achievement. So, how are they going to do that if they don't know why they are doing things? So, let's see. To give our pupils the tools they need to take more responsibility for their own learning, we need to tell them what they are going to learn, why they should learn it in the first place, and how they will recognize when they have succeeded. And research shows that pupils who regularly receive this information in the classroom are more focused for longer periods of time, more motivated, and better able to take responsibility for their own learning. So these two elements of formative assessment are important because if learners don't know what they are expected to learn, and they don't know how to recognize success, then we cannot promote peer or self-assessment, which are the two other elements of formative assessment, as well as very important life skills. So, let's have a look at formative feedback. Formative feedback focuses on what is said to the students and how it is said, so that they understand what you said, accept what is being said, be willing to make a change and implement the change. Because formative feedback is only useful and successful if the student's learning improves. And this depends on their capacity to understand the feedback, an inclination to accept this feedback, and the decision to act upon it. And this has an interpersonal motivational element that we cannot ignore. So the goal here is to change the student's capacity to produce better work, not just to improve present work. So let's see if there are any questions so far. Well, I hope, Arturo, that I have more or less answered your question. Okay, so yeah, the difference between formative and summative assessment, I think I've explained that. So let's see, let's have a look at the characteristics of formative feedback. Now, formative feedback can be given by the teacher or by peers. But in both cases, it has the same characteristics. So we should, first of all, base the feedback on the learning goal and avoid comparing students. Also, it should focus on only 2 or 3 critical feedback points at a time. That is, students, when students receive more than 3 pieces of criticism, they suffer from what I call the hippo syndrome. I don't know if you know, but hippos, when they go underwater, they have these membranes that allow them to close their ears and their nostrils so that the water doesn't go into their head, into the ears and into the nostrils. Well, students do the same. They do exactly the same thing, the hippo thing. Whenever we exceed 3 pieces of criticism, they sort of shut down and they totally, let's say, plug off. So focus on 2 or 3 critical pieces of criticism, feedback at a time. Also, provide concrete suggestions for improvement. Avoid vague feedback like, for example, work harder. Okay, you tell the student, you have to work harder. Is that useful? Are you telling the student how, what to do? The student may say, teacher, I work hard, but still. So we need to provide concrete suggestions for improvement. We have to directly communicate the strength or the gap to the student. That is, okay, now you know the vocabulary for food, but you can improve by learning to ask questions related to food. For example, how to order food in a restaurant. So we are communicating there the strength. You have mastered the vocabulary of food, and there's a small gap. Okay, you need to practice these questions. Also, suggest small, manageable change rather than large, complex change. Again, baby steps, not just for us planning the formative assessment, but also baby steps for the students. Give immediate or timely feedback. This is very important. Feedback that is not given immediately after a piece of work has been done or submitted is of no use, because students will take a sheet of paper, will, for example, in a piece of written work, will look at the mark. Okay, let's see what I got. All right, and put it away, and they won't look at it again. I mean, the purpose of the feedback is gone, is lost. Give it constant feedback. That is, make it part of your class routines, not something that we do once in a while. Also, allow for students' own feedback. That is, this is something that we normally do. We ask the students to sit together, for example, exchange their writing and give each other feedback. Okay, how? We need to teach them. And also, we need to allow them to communicate their own perception of their own weaknesses and strengths, and ask for their commitment to change. That is, it's not enough that we give feedback, but they have to act upon it. And we have to require proof of this change. Now, let's see. Peer and self-assessment. This is something that assessment and feedback given by peers is something that we routinely do in class. But as I mentioned before, sometimes we don't give the students the necessary elements. So the 4 steps of assessment for learning includes teacher assessment and feedback, peer assessment and feedback, student assessment and feedback. And that leads to an autonomous, self-reflective, analytical learner. Now, when we are using assessment for learning in the classroom, peer and self-assessment are effective approaches to enhancing the learning of the students. Explicitly teaching students how to assess their own work and their work of their peers has many benefits, because it promotes students' understanding of their own learning and also provides a critical analysis of their own efforts. For example, if they have to reflect critically upon the learning of their peers, it also gives them, increases their own understanding of how to go about doing a particular task. Because as they have to analyze what the others have done, they may suddenly say, aha, you know those aha moments? Aha, look at this. He did this in a much better way than I did. We did it in a different way, and we both arrived at the same result. But I think that his way of doing it is more efficient. So it gives students an insight into how to do things differently, helps them develop a broader view of how questions can be answered, how tasks can be completed, and the methods their peers are using. And in this way, they can enrich their own portfolio of learning strategies. Self-assessment gives students the opportunity to use success criteria to make judgments, identify their own strengths, and set targets. And these are important life skills and metacognitive strategies. It helps them to better understand what their own work is being judged against, what good work should look like or include, and how to go about making their work better. So, meaningful peer and self-assessment have the potential to positively contribute to student learning and achievement. And for example, peer assessment occurs best when students are comfortable and accustomed to a cycle of assessment feedback action to using the learning intentions and the success criteria to receiving and applying improvement feedback from you. So it takes time. I know that many of you will point this out. It takes time and practice. That is, as I said before, you cannot possibly tell students, okay, let's assess, sit with your partner and assess their work. Okay, how do you go about it? It needs time and practice. So we need to explicitly teach and model how to provide feedback before handing the responsibility to the students. As to student self-assessment, when we explicitly teach students to become effective self-assessors, they become empowered to take responsibility or to take charge of their own learning. Again, an essential life skill. So, some practical ideas. How can we introduce peer and self-assessment? To begin with, let's identify assignments or activities for which students might benefit from peer and self-assessment. Not all the activities lend themselves to this type of assessment, feedback, sorry. So pick certain activities that lend themselves nicely to peer and self-assessment and feedback. Considering also breaking larger assignments into smaller pieces and incorporate peer assessment opportunities at each stage. For example, when students are doing a writing exercise, when students are doing a project, tasks that take some time, okay, establish milestones and establish opportunities for assessment and feedback at different points at these milestones. Also, involve the students in defining and or clarifying the success criteria, because these are usually expressed in language that is not very student-friendly, because they are meant for the teacher, especially if you find them in the course book. But you can reformulate that with the students or without them in language that the students can understand. Work with exemplars, that is, with samples of work that make the criteria visible for the students, that they can say, okay, this is something that I shouldn't be doing, this is quality work. Also, teach them how to apply success criteria, that is, explicit instruction and modeling using samples, so they can understand what constitutes quality work. Provide guidance and opportunities to apply the criteria. Yes, for example, applying the criteria to anonymous samples of work that you can collect from previous years. Yes, and asking the students to look at the samples and apply the criteria to the samples. For example, what does a good summary look like? Create a checklist and ask the students to look at a summary and evaluate, assess how successful the writing of that summary has been. Also, support them with prompts, with sentence starters and feedback forms, where they can use to write the assessments. Also, how can we support this peer assessment? Well, we can combine peer assessment with your own feedback. That is, using both elements. First, peer assessment, and then you step in. Develop and use peer assessment tools, templates, checklists, rubrics. Use the gradual release of responsibility model. Yes, that is, first you model, then there is guided instruction, shared practice where both you and the students make assessment and give feedback, and then independent practice. Also, develop ground rules for giving effective feedback. And here it's important to convey to the students the importance of being polite and constructive at all times. You can create with the students a wall chart, design bookmarks, whatever, so that they have there some key things to bear in mind when they are giving feedback, mostly in terms of effective communication and collaboration with their peers. Also, as I mentioned before, require evidence that assessment, feedback, and improvements occur. Select appropriate strategies or tools. As I mentioned before, there are lots of things here, creating checklists, rubrics, templates. Teach and model. Also, involve the students in developing criteria. Sometimes we do have a set of success criteria in the book, but then as a teacher, you can also have your own agenda and decide that besides that, you also want to have these learning intentions and these success criteria for this particular group of students. So have them assess their work against the success criteria and identify where they have been successful. Highlight areas of improvements and allow time for making these improvements. How can you support self-assessment? Making it a regular part of the lesson, ensuring that the students, and sometimes their parents too, understand that self-assessment is about learning, not being right or wrong. Teaching, modeling, and scaffolding this self-assessment, yes, using, again, a range of techniques and tools to enable students to gradually take increased responsibility for their own learning. Asking them, for example, to highlight the best sections of their work, yes. Discussing, including reflection time at the end of the lesson. Sometimes we forget about this. Devoting 5 minutes at the end of the lesson for a plenary session for self-reflection or class reflection. Discussing and practicing goal setting. Encouraging students to set their own goals. Okay, you have done this. I have done this. This is my weakness. This is my strength. What can I do to improve for the next time? Also, having self-assessment templates, yes, and introducing exit tickets or exit cards where students write and submit answers to prompts. For example, what was the most important thing that you learned today? What questions do you still have? So to encourage their reflection. Okay, so in this session, I aimed at defining what assessment for learning is, what the main components are, and I have provided some ideas of how to introduce this form of assessment in our teaching practice. As I said before, there are many more things to go deeper into, but at least I hope that the session has, to some extent, contributed to encouraging you to consider implementing formative assessment in your lessons. So here you have some references of materials that I personally have found very, very useful, particularly for a first approach to what formative assessment is this brief booklet by Paul Black and Dylan William, Inside the Black Box, which gives you the key elements of what formative assessment is. And then the work by Hattie, of course, and Unlocking Assessment, this also by Sofil. I think that you are going to find this material really useful. In case you would like to contact me, here is my contact email. You can find me on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, also on Instagram. And also, I have a very modest YouTube channel. So if you want to go around and have a look, you will find more material there that you can use. So thanks a lot again, Mo and everyone. Mo for the invitation and everybody for attending the session.
Thanks, Annie. It was a wonderful one indeed. You know, Ian and the team really thank you a lot. And of course, the people here would like to thank you a lot for this valuable presentation. A lot of people, you know, have some positive comments. Some are asking about the PowerPoint presentation. So if you would like to send it to them through me, you can send it
of course
by email, and then I'm gonna upload it to them and post about them on the Facebook page educast.ag.
Okay, I will. Somebody is asking me to show my contact
to
again.
share the contact again. Yeah.
Let me here. Let me see. There you are. There you are. Sorry, I think I stopped sharing too quickly.
It's okay. We still have some time, you know.
Yeah.
At some point, I thought it was, you know, till 4:15, you know, but once I thought for a moment, and I said yes, okay, it's 4:30, not 15.
Yeah. You see, I have my alarm clock here to keep track of the time.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so someone is asking a question here, which is, how come constant feedback? He's asking about constant feedback, and he's asking for more elaboration on this point.
Okay.
Yeah, his name is Yunus. Yeah.
Yeah. When I say constant feedback, I don't mean that you are going to be giving feedback all the time around the clock. No. What you need to do is make it an integral part of your lesson planning. So whenever you choose activities with which you are going to use peer feedback and assessment, for example, you need to make sure that this is something that is ongoing, meaning something that you do in your lessons frequently enough for the students to get used to it. It doesn't mean that you're going to do it with all the activities that you have planned for today's lesson, for example. No, but it's not something that you're going to do today in your lesson and then a month from now. No, because in that way, students will never get used to it. So when I talk about constant feedback, I mean giving students regular practice of feedback, either from you or from their peers. And besides that, we are always giving feedback as teachers. We're always giving feedback to our students during the lesson, even if it is not something that we have planned. Because when they are doing an activity, we generally say, okay, be careful because here you have made this mistake, or, oh, that's wonderful, what a good idea. This is also feedback. But what I mean with constant is that it is an integral part of your planning of your teaching practice. I hope I have answered the question.
Yeah, indeed you did. We have another question from Arturo. He said, what are the feedback that empowers the students?
Sorry, what?
What is the feedback? What is the feedback that empowers the students? There is
the feedback that empowers the students is, to begin with, honest feedback. Because even when we are giving very positive feedback, students need to know what they have done well. What types of feedback? It can be written feedback, it can be oral feedback. That is up to you. It will depend largely on the type of activity. But whatever feedback you give, it has to be clear, and the student needs to know exactly what they have done well, and as well as knowing what they haven't done so well. Even if it is a brilliant student, you have to tell them what in their work reflects that brilliance. It's not enough with saying, fantastic work. Okay, why? So that's right. There is somebody here, free user, says, feedback pushes the students to continue their work. Of course, by all means. So we need to be very honest in our feedback. And of course, we need to be very clear.
Yeah, and this, this reminds me of the progress feedback and its importance to working on learner autonomy, because if the students don't get progress feedback, they will never feel like they are making progress. They will not depend on themselves. They will keep, they will feel demotivated.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, that's why feedback is really important. Okay, so someone says, would you, Liling says, would you please suggest some strategies to provide meaningful feedback to huge classes with?
My God, more than
200 students. That's a massive number.
You are my hero. How come?
Do you know the names?
Yeah, that's right. How can you possibly know your students? That is terrible, Lillian. Yeah. Oh my God. Well, the only thing that I can think of with large classes, but of course, I haven't had ever the experience of such large classes. In Argentina, you can have classes up to 50 students, but never, ever 200. The only possible idea that comes to me off the top of my head is dividing students according to the weaknesses they show, for example. Suppose that there are students who have problems with the present perfect. Okay, but these other students don't have problems with the present perfect. They have another type of problem. Okay, so those together. Grouping students according to the misconceptions of or the weaknesses that they have shown, and providing as she says, in different classes, sorry, but they are taking this. Oh my God. Well, that clears it all, because I couldn't imagine how you can handle a class of 200. Jons, you're right, use technology, but also, again, grouping students according to the weaknesses they show or to the problems they have. And so you give feedback to this group, to that group, to that group, and to that group. So grouping students according to their misconceptions or their learning gaps is one possible solution. Still, having large classes, I know out of my own personal experience when I was teaching in Argentina, having large classes is a nightmare. Yes.